what we're going to talk at the end, if there's a little time, is what the next steps will be to actually get maybe a presentation together we can share, and possibly identify areas that we'd like to have someone come and talk to us to fill the gaps that we identify at the time. That sounds a little too directive, but I'm a consultant, so I have to do this kind of stuff. But being frank, we're going to try and set it up so together we can make something happen. And we have been up to this point, but maybe it's time to consolidate it a bit. That said, I want to throw it over to Anitra to introduce Marilyn, one of our special people who really is making a difference. And then we can talk about how we can build on stuff like that. Anitra, all yours.
Yeah, so I'm going to tell you the first secret about Marilyn is I met her in a tent in Rio during the Rio conference. And it wasn't just any tent. It was a very special tent. Wangari Maathai was there, Gus Speth, and a whole lot of other people known as United Nations Environment Program Global 500 laureates. And we were having our very first meeting with one another. We never even saw one another before. And it was a very special group of people at the Rio meeting on sustainable development. And then I had just had the women's group for the Rio meeting in Miami, which was 2,000 women speaking many, many languages. But anyhow, in 1991, Marilyn, who I was immediately impressed with, her wonderful techniques, started the largest provider for online education in the United States, and it may be globally, 85,000 students from kindergarten to 12th grade. And that's Laurel Spring Schools. And in 1995, she founded the Mother of Divine Grace, which was a Catholic, completely different, and a Catholic distance learning for 6,000 students. In 2001, she co-founded ICOC Internet High School in Tokyo, Japan. And then she founded the Laurel Spring C2 online learning school in South Korea. And recently she has co-founded the Vida International Schools for Afghan refugees. But she's now going to tell you about her School for Girls, which very bravely, and Marilyn is not only marvelously globally peripatetic, but she also has courage and is a pirouetting bulldog, because she hangs on to something and she'll see this through, like these getting the girls out of Afghanistan, which she's going to tell you, and is a worthy of a movie, a Spielberg movie. I can just see it now. But she does a lot of volunteer work too. Of course, she was the director of the United Nations Environment Program Global 500 laureates for years, and I think maybe you still are. And she was on the Captain Planet board, where they did outreach to young people about environmentally sound and good ideas, and Captain Planet would rush in and save the seas or save the walrus or something. And she's been on the USACOR board, and as such, she'd helped organize multiple workshops, particularly at the UN in New York. So John is going to introduce her educational bona fides and depth of her school. Go ahead, John.
Well, I just want to add really that one of the things that we are trying to do in this group is move from an old paradigm of separation and everybody in silos and everybody working on their own project and not even in relation to others. And I think what Marilyn has done in her life is to continue to break silos and continue to cross the boundaries that have been considered uncrossable. So when Marilyn, when you took on the boundaries of of the digital divide, if you like, you showed that, in fact, many people from many places can share a common learning space. But you also understood that there's some learning that has to happen with personal support. And so the work that you're going to share with us tonight about the girls in Afghanistan is clearly an illogical piece of work. Why would anybody sitting in America want to go and bridge that divide, which has so many multiple elements of division, and actually get on the ground and do work that is so high risk, so subversive, and yet so important? So I think, Marilyn, your story is a connecting story, a story of destroying what separates us, and looking at what interconnects us and what makes us interdependent. And I think that's why what you've got to say to us as a group of Voyagers is so vitally important. And I look forward to hearing that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is also helpful. And as I share my information, I also look to you for support as we really do something that's never been done before in this way in Afghanistan. And so what I would like to do is just begin today with the presentation and take you through that. I want to just mention that none of the photos that you will see are pictures of our team. There's been some information that's been removed for safety reasons. But I think it will give you a really good sense of where we are. And then I look forward to everybody's feedback, because we are in the process of developing a new program, 2 programs at the same time, actually. And your help would be so greatly appreciated.
Are we share screen? Yeah.
We shared screen and we ended up with me at the end. So I'm going to go back. Here we are. So I wanted to, this is a title that actually Anitra came up with. And I thought it was quite good. School in a war zone for Afghan girls. And truly that is true. And trying to use distance learning in a way that would accommodate students both in Afghanistan and outside of Afghanistan. And I think that what we've learned so far will be really helpful. Just to give you some background, why did I found Educate Girls Now? Really, it was my daughter who filmed the movie for Girl Rising about a young girl, Amina, who was 11 years old and was married. And this is part of the Girl Rising movement. And when I watched the multiple edits of this movie, I just couldn't, my heart broke. I was at that point running Laurel Springs, so this was completely out of my comfort area, but it seemed to me that there was a need that wasn't being filled. And that was the millions of girls not being educated. And like all of us, I was looking for a model that would work to help us move these girls forward, many who were promised into marriage at very young ages. And so I worked with Zari Kargar. She is a BBC reporter who worked with my daughter on the movie. And she said, what is missing is that these nonprofits come in and they try to educate girls, but they don't bring the mothers in. And the key to a girl's education is her mom, and her mom protecting her, and her mom using any support and funds to ensure that she goes to school. And so what we did is we ensured that every girl who was given money, every mom who was given money, in exchange, all their children went to school. We understand that boys and girls need to go to school. We made sure that every girl goes to school. And it was a very good model for us, because we found that moms want to be involved and they needed a way to feel empowered. As we began the program, we came across some challenges. First of all, we needed to be accepted by the communities. We work in multiple communities in Kabul, Khazar, Kunduz, Herat, Logar, and Mizar. Some were then Taliban run, some were not. And we also dealt with the disappearance of a young girl whose brother was a Taliban and had strapped a bomb to her back. We tried to retrieve her, we could not. We've had to negotiate with families to stop child marriages, specifically sitting down with the fathers to go over the benefits of an education for a girl. And in every case, those fathers have agreed, not always happily, but they've gone along with their wives mainly because at that point employment was so dire then. For these are the poorest of the poor, as John would say, and they needed our help. And immediately the program began to show success. We have rescued 13 war widows. These are women who have no husbands, and therefore, either if they don't marry into with a family member, they are left in the cold, literally out of their house and abandoned. And 4 children who were taking care of their younger brothers and sisters as their parents had died for many, many reasons. And so we have worked with 296 children up to now, and right now we're taking on children every week because of the dire need in Afghanistan. But that was our beginning. And so how it works is every week, every month, our team goes out and distributes food, clothing, books for school in the form of $100. Initially, we brought them their food, we brought them their clothing. The mothers were too scared to go out. They've now become more empowered and vital, and they take charge of the family. And during this very, very, very cold winter that has just been really hard for our people and for the people of Afghanistan, we've provided additional money for fuel. It's been so cold. And I have to say our team is our group is very fortunate because none of them have had to go without food or fuel. So I just wanted to give you a sense of where were we before the Taliban arrived. We had the lowest in Afghanistan. We had the lowest literacy rate in the world at 43%. 3.7 million children were out of school. Barry Hughes kindly did a wonderful model for us of what would happen year by year if we just continued to educate the girls that we were working with and other groups that we were partnering with. And we had great hopes of bringing that percentage up so that it would be closer to 60%. As you can see, there's always been a challenge with adolescent girls being less literate than boys. But what was so wonderful was that we were seeing a movement towards universities. And what all these girls always express to us in every conversation is how important education is. And I know that John can appreciate this. They are determined, driven to receive an education. So that was the before. That was where we were. And we were making progress. And I felt very, very hopeful with the support of our team who offered emotional and socio-emotional support. We're bringing them additional books and also helping them to deal with family problems, such as husbands who had either left or were not supportive or were addicted to opium. And then everything began to change. We saw it coming. By June, we were aware that we were in a very difficult position. And interestingly, and perhaps this is something we can discuss, there was a sense of shock among our team. Every time we brought up evacuation, obtaining visas to other countries, they kept saying, let's wait and see. It could be okay, things will be okay. Meanwhile, from an American point of view, it was the opposite of what I wanted to do. I was already looking at visas to Turkey, to India, to Jordan, to try to get our people out before the Taliban came. And of course, it was obvious to us it was happening. It was just when it was happening. What I learned about working with people in trauma is that sometimes they need to really they will do it when they're ready to take control, not when I wanted them to. As I was told, it's not the Afghan way. And so weeks before the evacuation, the invasion of Kabul, our team, who was known as a US nonprofit educating girls, which now became a death sentence, were receiving verbal and written threats. A bomb was planted in our director's car. We, luckily it was located and removed. Our director received a note that said, please report to the Islamic State headquarters. This is a stern warning that you will be killed. So I find that a stern warning, you will be killed if you, and of course we're not going to, she was not going to report. And so we began to move our team, and some of our families who had become known as proponents of education. We had some families who the girls were really succeeding in school. They were going to university, and they were working as interns, as journalists, and they were in danger, as were all our team members. And so it became evident that we had to immediately find a way to evacuate. And that became, I think, amidst the group, all of the challenges we've experienced, that period of time when we were attempting to evacuate was the most stressful, hardest. To not know logistics and be in the middle of a war zone was truly staggering. So we began day and night. We're up day and night commencing multiple attempts to evacuate them. We worked with the US government. We worked with a wonderful group called Vital Voices, incredible support from core members such as Ted Manning and John, and Anitra was incredible, and Ryan. Every option we could find. And at that point, the US was evacuating people. So we did receive what we will never know how many calls we received to evacuate our team, because they received different calls, but no one ever said who they were. They just merely asked for their passport. And of course they wouldn't give it to them. We did finally contact a colonel. We sent our people to the airport. Seats were reserved for them at the airport. But in addition to the fact that there had been a bombing, they were doing biometrics on everybody attempting to get in. And I'm sure you've seen the photos. It's just a plethora of people. They couldn't clear their biometrics. And so we decided to send them home after 3 days. It just was too dangerous to have them out in the middle of the Kabul airport with no food, no water, and the potential of another bomb. We lost a dear colleague and his family who was on their way to America. We're not able to go. He was killed and his family was injured, and they were returned to Kabul. So out of all of these multiple attempts, and they were going on day and night, we found this small group called Warrior Angels Rescue. And it was a grassroots nonprofit. It's located literally an hour away from here in a small town called Solvang. They had already done one evacuation of over 300 people to Canada. And they were evacuating by ground. When I told my daughter, who was helping me at the time and our team, everybody said, this is the craziest thing. You are not going to evacuate 158 women, children, and men by ground. But as I talked to Warrior Angel Rescue, they had experience. They had evacuated in Peru, in Chile, in Puerto Rico. And although they've never evacuated in Afghanistan, they had a large group of volunteers who were very, very, very well versed in doing this. And so as all of our other opportunities were fading, and our team was really in such a difficult place, we began to work with them and to begin to understand their plan. They work with Tufts University Global Leadership Program. And they had a plan, and they had a plan that would involve overground evacuation to Pakistan on a 30-day visa, after which our team had approval to go to Ecuador. So at this point, we had few choices and far more dangerous. And so we did not know the details. We were never given any of the information on how this was going to be implemented, other than when it happened, we knew that it happened. And on October 11th, our team and our families were evacuated in one night. And before our team left, they burned all documents, everything they had on their phones. All information about our work in Afghanistan was gone. They had memorized our phone numbers. And for 2 days straight, we knew that they were going through 17 Taliban checkpoints. And they were divided, we know they were divided up into various cars. A young girl would be placed with a man and a woman. No one traveled alone, and they were evacuated, which was, I have to say, probably one of the most stressful experiences, and hoping they would get through this process. So on October 13th, we received one text from one of our team members, and it showed a Pakistan stamped passport. And we knew that they had made it over the border. They were in Pakistan. Their 30-day tourist visa had been approved. And once they were there, they were being processed with COVID and vaccinations, food, housing, and medical assistance, which we had already planned and provided for through Warrior Angel Rescue. So that became a 4 or 5 month journey. We had hoped it to be a 1 month journey for them. We were immensely relieved that they were out of Afghanistan, but also worried for their future. So we had the approval of the Ecuadorian government. We had worked with Israel, Cyprus, Prague, Argentina, Uruguay, Rwanda to move our team there, or Mexico, as had many other evacuees. At the beginning, there was sort of a melee of people moving to different countries, and there was sort of an open heart of welcome. And so we received our greatest welcome from Ecuador. They saw this as a great PR opportunity. They already posted it in their newspapers. And in addition, we would bring money to those areas that had been the tourist areas, most popular in Ecuador. There were now hotels that were closed down, and we saw that we would move our entire team to Ecuador. And Ted Manning was really instrumental in introducing us to those people who helped us to establish safe housing in Ecuador. It was an exciting time. The Ecuadorian people came forth offering food, opportunities to teach music, dance, art, and also an opportunity for capital input into an area that had been really devastated by the coronavirus and was suffering from a lack of tourism. We already had begun working on refurbishing one specific tourist location, getting ready, preparing for our families, moving furniture in, and also preparing for a school. And I will talk more about the school that we envisioned at that point. And so our team was slated to leave on November 13th. We had a plane that had been rented and licensed. We had support from Warrior Angel Rescue, and they had the money to pay for that. And so those evacuees, those who had passports and those without passports, which has turned into be a tremendous challenge, were preparing to leave for Ecuador for their new life. And suddenly and unexpectedly, Ecuador began to demand additional documentation and promises that the United States government was going to take these people in a year. Well, as you can imagine, up to now, the response from the United States government had been less than promising, very willing to interact and talk, but they weren't going to give their promise. They were already burdened, as we learned, with a huge amount of evacuees, and they were particularly resentful of those who came from nonprofits who were not, and those evacuees had not been in refugee camps. Now, when we originally started, we had their support, but as they began to deal with the logistics, they then began to say they would not take people unless they were in fact had come from refugee camps, and they would not guarantee that these refugees or evacuees, they like to be called evacuees, would be brought to the US. And with that, Ecuador put a hold on their travels to their country, which was a huge shock, a huge disappointment, and began what became an epic journey of finding other safe havens for our people, with the understanding that they would then be brought to the United States, hopefully, as we had filed their P2s, their humanitarian paroles, and what's called their SIVs. And so our people waited and waited and waited, and we work every day to advocate for them. And our team is still in Pakistan. And we have heard some promising news this week. The Ecuadorian government has asked for their passports again and their CVs and a statement of what they would offer to Ecuador. In addition, we have spoken with the US government, and they are proponents of our people going to Ecuador. Our people are now in Pakistan without a tourist visa. Luckily, fortunately, one of the top ministers is respectful of our situation and has given his stamp of approval for them to stay until we can remove them. And so we began a new approach. You know, as I love what John said about finding ways to bridge the silo. And so Ecuador was on hold, and we began to talk to Spain, Germany, Turkey, and Jordan, and India. And thank you, John, for that lovely letter to Jordan. We looked like we had an opening there too. And at this point, what's been happening is that one by one, we've been moving our families out as they receive approval. So we've had families who have gone to Spain, Germany, Turkey, and India. And when I say families, I mean one family at a time leaves. And at the same time that a family leaves, we are able to evacuate and usually bring in one new family from Afghanistan. So it's become a very different process, very different than what we had imagined we would be doing when we looked at Ecuador as our, what we called our Alma village. And it would be a place of peace and understanding for our children and our people. So now where were we? It was clear that we were still in Pakistan. Our people, there was a lot of emotional challenges they were facing. They were beginning to experience what was already happening for them: depression, PTSD, and a sense of trauma. Although, as I was sharing with Anitra, when they were in Afghanistan, you didn't say, "Oh, I'm stressed out because I have no food today." You had no food. You had to go find some. So all of a sudden, feelings were emerging, and people were beginning to really to demonstrate their fear and their worry. And we realized at that point it was time to focus on education. Many of our children had been out of school for 6 months, and as we know, school is valued in Afghanistan. And so we began a new program, the Vida School. And I have to lend my greatest admiration to a young woman named Nargis Sargan. She and I met when she was working in Afghanistan. She was running the Maison International School, and she was working with Oak Meadow School. Oak Meadow School is one of the schools I started, and it is a Waldorf-based school based on appreciating the developmental steps that each child takes, focusing on arts and creativity and imagination, and slowly moving them into experiencing their intellect and expressing that through their work that's integrated with art and music and various and dance. So this was a stretch, but I found her. I had fallen in love with her in Afghanistan. I just thought she was the most beautiful woman. And I was talking to her in April and May and asking her how the school was going and feeling such worry for her. And I did find her. She had evacuated and she was in Wisconsin at the military base. And what I discovered was, in her most amazing way, she had started a school for children there. There were over 300 children without school. And she created a school program based on the simplest but most important rudimentary support to help them adjust to living in the American culture, beginning with the language, culture, emotional learnings, physical learning, and just the opportunity to go to school. And she drew upon the refugees in the camp to help her to start a school for 300 children. They had no internet. They had no books. They were able to get paper, pens, and pencils and crayons. The United States government did not provided a space for them to meet, but could not give them or did not give them more. So I grabbed her. I found her when she was in Wisconsin, and when she moved to Virginia, and I'm so grateful that she was able to leave, I began to talk to her about Vida School, because clearly I could not run a school for Afghan girls. With my knowledge and my language, lack of language, and just the understanding that's needed. And so she came on gladly to help us. She speaks Urdu, Pashtun, all 7 dialects, as well as Dari in English, and has a heart of gold. And so with her support and with the support of Warrior Angel Rescues, who is really housing our people, we started Vida School. And we chose the name Vida because it means, as you can see, life in Spanish and knowledge in Dari. And we had a vision at the beginning that it would include all our students in one class, because that was the model we were creating for Ecuador, was classes be focused on beginning, medium, and then advanced learners. Well, we were now moving students to Spain and to Germany and to Turkey and to India. This was a huge challenge. And so in that midst, we also discovered there were other portions of this puzzle. For example, many of the husbands spoke English, but the wives did not. The husbands had come from good and solid educations, whereas many of the wives had not. So teaching in English is a challenge. And so we began to look at doing a one-to-one approach. If you have a child in Turkey, they're at a different time than a child who's in India and a child who's in Pakistan. And so we really ended up starting 2 programs that are running parallel. Those children who are in Pakistan and they're all together, we've called upon our parents and who have professional backgrounds to help us to teach those students. And they meet in a meeting place every day, and they have classes. We do academic classes, we do healing and emotional work on motivation, mental health, arts, and support. And those students who are in other countries, they're mostly younger children. We're using the Oak Meadow curriculum again, which is child-based and really provides them with a lot of opportunity to express themselves. Many of these children have never done art and have never experienced an opportunity to share their art and to use art as a conduit. Older children are using the National Afghan curriculum. They all speak Afghan, they all speak Dari perfectly, and English is a challenge for them. So our original hope that they would be able to use the Oak Meadow curriculum, a Waldorf-based curriculum, was unrealistic. So we've sort of been through various tried and programs to try and figure out what works. So we are now at a point where the teachers and instructors in Pakistan meet with their students, and it's been just so beautiful to see they're really our parents who are teaching the students. We have a dentist who's teaching biology, a lawyer who's teaching intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, another individual who's highly ranked who is teaching English, and another individual who's never taught art but loves art is working with the children on art, and they're all in high school. So as we get more and more students, we keep adjusting the program. It's sort of a work in progress. I mean, our goal and our hope is they would end up in one place together, 153 children and families, but that isn't happening yet. And we felt that education and empowering our students and our team was the most important thing. We also do physical education. We have one of the women who was part of the Afghan national basketball team. So we're calling upon our families to help us, which is what Nargis did when she was in Wisconsin. And it's really what I did when I first started Laurel Springs. Laurel Springs was very small when we first began our program, and we sort of were creating it in the same. So as we are growing, we're looking at the fact that we have students now fanning out across the world, across the globe. We hope to have students soon in the US. We have students in Germany, in Spain, in Turkey, and in India, and in Pakistan. And so we are really, in many cases, doing a one-to-one program and adjusting the language learning to the countries they're going to. And we've brought in teachers from the Maison International School in Afghanistan who have used the Oak Meadow curriculum, and they are working with our families so that we have teachers who can speak the language. And next week, we're actually doing a teacher training for all our teachers and parents. So here are these, I think this is just sort of one of the amazing parts of the story. Here are these individuals who have just been evacuated from Afghanistan, and now they're learning about education, and they're actually part of our team, and they're learning about early childhood development and the development of the brain. And education in Afghanistan is very different than ours. It's a very rote approach to education. You learn the information on a test, you take the test, and that's how you learn. So this is a sort of very, I mean, every day is exciting, and watching our team work together is truly inspiring. But I'd like to go back to Afghanistan with you, because we now have, when the Taliban emerged, I thought this is it. Those people who were able to evacuate have evacuated. How can we touch our other people? But Mariam, our team director, was incredible. She had put together a plan, put together a new team, and they were all individuals who had been part of our school. We're now in university, which is one of the accolades of our program, is that our children do go on to university. And once she was evacuated, she then let me know the plan. And I was very upset at first. I wanted to know, what is our plan? And she kept saying, there's a plan, there's a plan. And finally, one of our translators said to me, you have to understand the Afghan way, which is so important to understand the culture. She said, when she is safe, when she is in her new destination, she will reveal to you the plan. And there was a plan in place. We had new team members, all young, highly committed to the education of girls. Some of them teachers, some of them individuals who are in college, who actually took over the support of our community and caring for everyone in our community. So since the invasion, from before until now, we have not missed 1 month of ensuring that our families are cared for. So you can imagine, in the middle of this coldest winter with no food for many other people, we have been continuing to care for our family. Our first priority has been food and fuel. Obviously, that's the most essential part of their well-being. You have to make sure they're safe, and it's been so cold. We have been able to distribute books in some areas, preparing them for the school year. what I've really learned is that of our team, some of our children are in private schools. So there's private schools, learning centers, public schools, and homeschooling. So 40% of our girls are currently receiving some form of education. They are not devoid of education in the way that I had imagined. And it was really just a gift to learn that. And for those students who are in public schools, who are not receiving any outside support during what they call the winter vacation. The winter vacation means it's too cold to go to school, and so they stay home until March. And of those students, 47% of our children are receiving some form of education. And our team is going out providing books, encouraging families, working with our girls. When schools reopen in March, there is hope that the Taliban will allow more girls to go to school over the age of 6th grade. We don't know. I mean, this is a work in progress. There's a lot of pressure on the Taliban to do this. They certainly are letting girls go to school if they're in private schools, and private schools are really, they're very different than the ones here. They're very minimal in what they offer, but they are allowed. And they are saying that our college girls will return to university as long as they follow the Islamic rule. So the work in Afghanistan is a change. It changes day by day. We were going to move into a more aggressive approach to education, but one of our colleagues who runs a grocery store for our families was just kidnapped. And so we pulled back, because what we can't afford is for any of our young team to be kidnapped or endangered in any way. We feel such a responsibility, and they're out there on the streets with our families. So we're sort of, I would like to say that we're on hold in Afghanistan in terms of doing a more aggressive approach. I want to mention we did try online learning, both in Afghanistan and in Pakistan, and it didn't work. We had the whole Afghan national curriculum. We hope to deliver it on cell phone. It's not a curriculum that it can be delivered online, and people were not comfortable. So those children in Pakistan who have that curriculum receive it in print. Those children who are in Afghanistan in older grades, if they're in a safe area, we send it to them in print so they can study for the next term. It is not an assessment-based program, so there's some challenges with it, but we're continuing to work on upgrading that curriculum. So what I continue to believe is, and I think we all know is true, is that investing in education is key. I watch how our girls are responding to being educated, and it's so empowering to them. It's so empowering to their mothers. It's so empowering to their fathers. Afghan people have hearts of gold. They want their children to be educated. They don't want them to go through what they've been through. And we know what an education can do for a girl in terms of jobs, marriage, less children. And the thing that I see is our biggest challenge is how to scale our program. I believe that our program, Vita Schools, outside of Afghanistan is really becoming, we're getting clearer and clearer on formulating our plan. We have been successful in educating our children daily. We have a director for the program, Nargis, who speaks the language. And I have to say, without someone who can speak Dari and Pashtun and Urdu, we would not be able to do this. And our children in Afghanistan, we will really know more in March when school opens. And our hope is that they will either go to private schools and go to learning centers, but hopefully there will be some movement in the opening of public schools. And with that, I'd like to just mention that one of the things that we've been focusing on and that we would love John's help with is emotional care. the way that we've been working with our children on healing the trauma they've experienced has really been through art and through sports and through talking. But what I'm seeing is that not only our people who are in Afghanistan, but our team who's working with us really needs that emotional support. This is not a sprint. This is a long haul. I think when I began, my goal was to get our people out and move on. This is not going to be a short program. This is going to be a long program. And the development of this school is probably one of the most exciting things I've done since starting Laurel Springs, if not more exciting to me. And so I'd like to end with that and just begin our conversation. And I would love and look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. This is at the same time very, very hopeful for the horrible dilemma of women in patriarchally oppressed nations where education doesn't occur except for maybe only 1/3 of the women, and a wonderful example of how only a few people can make a huge difference in pivoting from an oppressive model to a model of hope and well-being. And it's also a collective consciousness that Mompella, John Gilmore, Keith Sutter, Prince Hassan, David Pollock, Crystal McDonald, and Ted Manning, and many people from associations as well as Club of Rome have reached out to give you tiny pieces of support and hope. It's like a collective brain that you have to hang on to and to help do some of these things. And I can see that it's not over, but we all, of course, know what educating females like John Gilmore is doing and Mompella and you are doing makes a much smaller family size, brings healthy children up to be productive and skilled people, makes a model for the whole community, and brings up the skill level as well as down the birth rate. And so what a wonderful thing this is for a pivot in the condition of humanity. But I'm going to hand, John, are you there? Can I see your smiling face? So I'm going to hand over questions because I think the educational part is really, really important. John, did you fall off again? John? Ryan, can you see if he's trying to get in?
Yeah, we're maybe losing part
He
of
appears to be online, but I have no way of telling anything else.
All right. So
we could
one of my major questions is when you're working with the girls, it seems to me that both in John and Mompella's LEAP schools, where 66% of the learners are girls, and in your schools, the girls seem to work very hard because, okay, he needs to be unmuted or something. He has
I can't do anything for that. He has to unmute himself.
He says you have to unmute yourself. But it seems to me that the girls have so few pathways that learning seems to them a wonderful path forward in their life. And I'm wondering how you feel about the energy that comes from finally seeing a pathway forward in their life, because that's what seems to be happening in South Africa.
It's so true. I was just talking to Nargis, our director, and she was saying when she was in Afghanistan, even though she came from an education family, there was only a few choices. You could be a doctor, you could be an engineer, you could be a teacher. You could be a dentist, but it wasn't like here. She said, when I've come here to America, I have so many choices. So we are beginning to orient our girls in Pakistan the most because they're older, which is the way it's worked out is all our older children are in Pakistan, our younger children are mostly in other countries. And we are beginning, that's why we've been beginning to work on motivation and what it would be like in another country for them. And their opportunities, that they really have opportunities to be who they want to be. And that education and is going to really make a difference. And they're so motivated. I mean, they're so excited to be doing this. This is their lifeline, and this is their parents' lifeline. I can't tell you how many times the parents, even through a translator, will say to me, you know, please make sure my child learns English. I just want to make sure they're successful. And what that means to a parent may be different than it would mean to a child if they arrived in another country. But education is key for them. It's a stepping stone. And for those girls in Afghanistan, I mean, we have hope of still extracting some of our younger college level girls. There are families that don't want to leave Afghanistan. It's their home. I was accused of being an escaper last week. One of our older women who's 73, she's a grandmother. She told her daughter to tell me I'm an escaper. I'm trying to make everybody escape. And she didn't like that because she likes Afghanistan and it's fine. But for our younger girls who are in college and who can see the future, they're the ones that we're focused on. Either finding avenues in Afghanistan for them and then hopefully evacuating them as well.
John?
Yeah, sorry, I was on another device and it said I couldn't unmute, but that's fine. I'm in.
Yay.
Marilyn, I think as we ask you a few questions, we haven't got a lot of time. It would be very easy for us to go into the detail of the work that you've outlined so beautifully. And we're all, I know I can speak for everyone here, we're in absolute awe of the intent and the sustained intent in almost impossible situations. And maybe that, you know, as we talk about shifting paradigms from a particular framework of seeing the world competitively and we put others down to a world in which we can quantify wellness, just step above it a bit and say, what do you think, if you were to pick out one or two elements that you think at a high level would inform any project that you do in the future? You know, what would those be? What are the kind of common or key threads to the complex success of the process in which you're involved, not the outcome? Is it possible to pick out any aspect or aspects that you think would be useful to any project?
First of all, I love that. I love that you do that. Thank you so much, because when you're in the weeds and you're emotionally involved, it's so helpful to have that. I feel like intrinsic empowerment is essential. So that's one of the things that I think it makes a huge difference is empowerment of our people. And the other thing that I think is really important is for them not only to have empowerment, but to be able to envision a path forward. Because right now there's that sense of uncertainty. And with that sense of uncertainty comes fear and depression, rather than knowing they are whole human beings that they will get out. They feel, so when you're in the middle of, and you know this best, is when you're in the middle of feeling helpless, how do you extricate yourself to feel that? And so my sense is creating a sense that there's a path forward, that we will and they will have a new future.
If I could reflect for you that,
Yeah,
what I heard in your story was how much you've had to empower yourself.
yes.
So it's an interesting thing that we talk about the subjects of our attention having to empower themselves, but a crisis of this nature puts you right into a space that's completely unfamiliar. And it's actually a repositioning of yourself. And if I extrapolate that, when I hear what Mampela says about the struggle of 1960s in South Africa, she felt helpless. There was a helplessness. And out of the pain and the struggle of the helplessness, as long as you collaborate and work with some degree of hope and trust, the impossible becomes the possible. Is that a valid observation?
Absolutely. It's so true. I mean, yes, absolutely. You articulated it well. So first of all, I would say that that's been really key in working with our team, and also offering self-care to our team as they move along. And also that the impossible has become possible every day.
Yeah.
We face it with the belief that something amazing is going to happen, and it does. I mean,
and sometimes this work costs one as the rescuer, but I haven't heard the word rescue in your narrative. What you've actually said is we had to rescue our own hope, and through that process, provide hope and trust others to empower themselves. John, I know you have vast experience of this kind of work and other kinds of work. How does that resonate with you?
You're talking to John Richardson?
Yeah, John, I'm asking John. I know you've had extensive experience of this kind of work in different contexts, in Asia and other contexts. How does it resonate with you that the big challenge in much of this work is managing yourself, not just the process of the empowerment? Okay, I'm not sure if John can hear.
I think he is frozen. He's frozen and he's muted.
John, you're muted. John Richardson, you're muted. Could you unmute that? That's it.
No, didn't quite come yet. Got to do it once. There it is.
That's
There
it.
we go.
Well, my work pales in comparison to what I've just been listening to, and I'd just like to say that I mean, in my own experience, it has been beginning by, and I won't say whether this, I'll just answer the question. I'm not sure this is relevant to Afghanistan or not, but it is to be, as much as one can, to become part of the culture, whatever the culture is, in a non-judgmental way, and to find allies who you can look up to, who can partner in that way. And to do that, even though there may be much that you don't respect, but to do that in respectful ways. I mean, I think about that in my work in Sri Lanka, and dealing with militants sitting in Jaffna, sitting at a coffee table and having tea with members of the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Elam, and asking them what they do, and you know, how it feels, and what are the problems that they encounter. And then they'll say, well, if you had these kinds of experiences yourself, but to draw people out who you're seeking to help to become change in a way that respects who they are and what they are as the starting point, rather than coming at a space of being judgmental. I think that's the best thing. I mean, I particularly in Sri Lanka, which was, I mean, you would go by a mailbox and wonder whether it was going to blow up. And for example, I mean, we did other things. I played tennis, for example, and it was a government tennis area, and there was a pillbox guarding the tennis area. And I always was very careful not to carry my tennis racket in a bag. And so when I would walk up, I would wave my tennis racket at them so they would be sure it wasn't a machine gun. And then maybe we'd have a little chat if they could speak English about the fact that I was a naval officer and had done these kinds of things. So being empathic, even, I think that's the most important, even reaching out to the people who you are trying to change, the authority figures, in a respectful way, and then coming from that in trying to have them be partners in ways that they can understand, and role models for at least some part of their agenda. I think that's about what I would say.
John, that's beautiful. I hear you talking about the humanization of the process. And I think that's something that the Voyagers group has in common. We all share an understanding, and you've just articulated it with such graphic beauty. The tennis racket is a symbol of peace rather than a representation of a weapon. Maybe you should get into the traffic in Canada. I'm sure you would sort them out there.
Yeah, well, my reaction to this is you guys are doing fabulous stuff. And quite frankly, we are learning something about what people believe well-being to be.
Yes.
Because, and as you both have said very clearly, it is essential that you define something resembling hope to get people to actually talk to each other and work together. And we found that with adults all over the world, that you got, so I don't teach kids, I teach university students and adults, but they strike me as generally true. And that's really been a lot behind the success that all my work has had around the world. Yeah, actually, the term I used when I made the presentation was you just ask. There are a lot of people who have never been asked what they really want, what they really think. And often simply asking them to describe their ideal future will get them working together to try and achieve it. If somebody from the government says, hi, I'm here from the government, I'm going to help you, and this is what you have to do, I'm sorry, you might as well go away.
Yeah. So if I could ask you, Anitra, you know, when I first met you and we had conversations, I understood immediately that while you're planting, you're not growing human beings and you're not growing adults as teddies, but while you're planting, you're engaging people all the time. And the action of regeneration in the ocean is in itself a humanizing process. Do you want to comment on that in any way?
Well, before we got to plant, there was a lot of humanizing had to go on at a legal level, at a governmental level, at a community level, and convincing people there was a better future, even though they didn't know there was a better future because nobody had ever done that before. But they could see from reforestation and from the few mangrove things that had happened that we could go underwater and do something. It was a judge who made his decision, and the government people jumped on it. Oh yeah, let's try that. Let's try that. And once the stakeholders in the community saw the water got clearer and so forth, then they were all for it. We had a very large symposium where we invited all the stakeholders. We had the citizens coalitions. We had the people who ran the bridges and the Department of Transportation who built the causeways. We had 9 across the very disruptive causeways across this little tropical bay, the port people and all the government people who were pro and con restoration. And at the end, we had the people from the newspaper be the sessions chair, scribes. And after the scientists and the infrastructure people gave all their talks about section by section about the fish, the invertebrates, the circulation, the chemistry, the pollutants, then we broke into groups of 20. It's called American Assembly. And we all addressed the same questions. And the newspaper people had to write it all down. And they came to basically the same solution. We'd like to see this much better for our children than our ancestors since 1920, when Miami became civilized, have made it. We'd like to see it much better. And so then money started pouring in and changes started happening. And now it's the place where the manatees are still alive. Up at Cape Canaveral, 1,200 manatees starved to death because they didn't have enough seagrass last winter. But we have thousands of manatees we didn't have then. So it's a question of getting the stakeholder, like Ted does, the stakeholders aligned with a vision beyond what they could fight about. Who can fight about such a wonderful vision? I mean, I was just in I'm a advisor to George Bush III, who's the half Mexican son of Jeb Bush, who runs the biggest agency who runs all the land in Texas. Half of the legislature doesn't believe in climate change. The other are rabid environmentalists. So we can't talk about climate change, but we can talk about our vision for better Texas bays and the fish and the clear water and the same thing we did in Biscayne Bay 40 years ago. So it's a question of getting a pivot in the mind of the stakeholders.
Yeah.
As long as
And I
they're
think-
not actively fighting each other now.
Yeah.
In which case you are too late.
Well,
I wanted to say,
Marilyn will tell us we're never too late. Carry on,
Yeah.
Marilyn.
well, one of the things that our team said is they don't want to be called refugees. They
Yeah.
would be called evacuees, but they said maybe we want to be called arrivers,
Lovely.
because we
Lovely.
are arriving at our new
That's
part of our
beautiful.
life.
Yeah, that's
And-
lovely.
And I think that's really lovely that they're beginning to formulate a new way of looking at this in terms of
Yeah.
terminology.
It's a little
And-
bit like the shift in the language from sustainability to regeneration,
Yes.
because sustainability is hanging on to what you've got, whereas regeneration is creating something new. And the arriver is definitely a positive statement as opposed to the refugee. Van, would you like to comment on any of the aspects that we've raised here, and in terms of where you think we go as a group with what Marilyn has shared with us?
Van, you're muted. Van, you're muted.
Sorry, there we go. I was really taken by the profundity, Maryland's an amazing accomplishment. And you haven't given up yet, so keep it up. I was thinking about, I've never really been part of the educational establishment. As a graduate student, I noticed all the infighting among the staff and decided I didn't want to be part of that kind of thing. So I avoided the educational teaching establishment. But I'm just thinking, I've been actually teaching Buddhism for about 30 years. And it began just saying what I had been taught to new people arriving, to the point where I think I've got some of it down to an understandable bit. and internalized it. But the main thing about the Buddhism, as the Buddha said, don't just take what I've written. Figure it out for yourself. And if it works, do it.
Mhm.
And I think that's a basic chunk of a lot of education. If it works, do it. And so there's, and I think that's something that when you can walk away from a student and say, okay, they've got it, they're okay.
Listening to the conversation between Bishop Tutu and the Dalai Lama in the book. I can't remember the name now. Anitra, what's the
Joy.
name? Joy. The book
The
called
dialogue on joy, yes.
Joy. The focus on humanity is just constant. And the African value system of Ubuntu that declares, I am human because of you.
Yeah.
My humanity is only affirmed in your humanity, is so embodied in your discourse, Marilyn. You know, the acceptance that this is not something you're doing for them, it's something you're doing for yourself.
Yeah.
And it is your meaning as well as their meaning. You have no control over their meaning, which is what Van is saying. You know, that you can only take it to a point. But when they can turn around and say, we don't want to be refugees, we want to be arrivers, that liberation is happening. The self-liberation is happening. And then the connection with each other and with you becomes the thing. Now, I really believe, Ted, that in our group here, with all the presentations we've been going through, we kind of hope that there may be something bigger than what we've got.
Yeah.
But I don't think there is. I think it is the combination of the narratives that keep telling us the same thing, that you've got to take risks, you've got to be
we're after, but what we're trying to do is find better concepts and tools.
Yes, yes.
And I mean, I was about to ask if you hadn't asked me to respond, both you and Marilyn. You both have managed to be very successful in situations where you're walking in and clearly at least two groups don't agree with each other right off the bat, and that becomes the milieu within which you have to try and operate. I, at a much smaller level, have the same thing, where the sort of the fisher people and the tourists are having fist fights in the streets. And it's a little easier for us because we have a higher authority, like the government, who can sort of force them to come and talk to us. So I'm coming back to you guys and saying, how do you do it?
Well, I think John hit the nail on the head with that.
Yeah.
You know, it is show up,
Mhm.
be fully
Yeah.
present,
Mhm.
engage. You know, show up, be fully present, and engage. And show up messy. Don't try and show up tidy. You know, show up messy, and accept that you can't tidy it.
Yeah.
Because you're clumsy. You don't know what the protocols are. But if you show up with the vulnerability, then there's the cue. But now, what we keep looking for is experts to tell us what the formula is, and they are frightening people. If we show up with the formula, we oppress again. We create ourselves as the fountain of knowledge, and so we detach ourselves from the humanity, and we trap. I wonder, Ryan, if you got a view on this? I know how much experience you have in medical field, in work you've done in crisis. Any perspective on that question of, how do we break the silos? How do we create the new paradigm? Individually, what is it that we are doing differently? And that's the message we want to carry into the world, actually, not just into the Club of Rome.
Well, there's so many different issues going on in the world. And so each one of these crises is going to have to be addressed differently, but so many of them have the common factors. So I think one of the biggest problems throughout the world is a combination of corruption and selfishness, and they go very closely together. When I was in Haiti, you just couldn't get anything into the country without having to deal with the corruption and the barriers to that. And for these people to be demanding money for things that are literally life-saving for so many people while they're living like kings, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so until we change that part of humanity, we're not really going to get very far.
Well, I think the Voyagers have got a view that is changing that to say.
Wait a minute. On the other
Sorry.
hand, Ryan and Jack Allison and some of them did a great deal for those who were in dire need. And they worked really long days in really rough places where most physicians would have never worked because there was no electricity, there was no hospital, there was nothing. And they were attending to the needs of all these people who had been crushed.
Yeah.
One example, I had to develop a workaround because the government of Haiti, or at least the Minister of Health, wanted to charge us $1,500 US each week to get free supplies that were donated by the United Nations.
Sounds familiar.
And so I went to the Brazilian military base because they were in charge of the UN peacekeepers in Haiti. And since I'm fluent in Portuguese, I just basically told them to take me to their leader. And they saw an American, a doctor, he speaks Portuguese. Oh, this guy's very important. And they had no idea. So they took me to the colonel in charge of all the donations. And he told me that I could take as much as I needed. They weren't aware of the arrangement that the Minister of Health had set up. So I arranged for a semi to come, filled it up with millions of dollars worth of food, medication, supplies. And then I kept coming back, and it was far more than I needed for my own projects. So I started taking them to all the other organizations, including, there's a nice picture of me with the Brazilian colonel delivering a few $1 million worth to Sean Penn's organization.
Yeah.
So there are workarounds. And
don't you think it was your relationship? You created a relationship and a sense of connection that.
Well, that colonel still keeps in touch with me because, he saw that there was somebody that was going above and beyond. It was kind of funny because he kept inviting me back to the base, and he was kind of a hard ass, but whenever I'd show up, he'd walk out of the meetings with all the other officers and just go give me a hug. And so that all the Brazilian officers thought that, oh, this guy is really important. Colonel Hardass is dropping everything to go see him. And so I was getting saluted right and left by the Brazilians.
Well done.
I got invited to the changing of the commanding general of the UN peacekeepers. And I thought, okay, now they're going to see that I'm a nobody because I rode on the back of a top, standing on the bumper of this little Toyota pickup. And I had to walk the last block and a half down a dirt road. And so they're going to see, oh, well, I'm not showing up with an entourage. But then a big US Humvee pulled up next to me and asked me if I was going to that ceremony. And I said yes. So I got in, and it was the commander of the US forces in Haiti. And when they got to the gate, the guards didn't understand English, so they had to roll down my window so I could explain who we were. So reinforce the idea that I was this important.
You leave out the part that you translated for everybody from Angelina Jolie to Melania Trump. And who was it? Barack Obama's wife. You translated for her to Portuguese so that he could escort her around.
Well, she actually had her own translator, so I was not needed that day. But
well, I know time is catching us, but if I could just observe and then hand back to you, Anitra, what is common to the 7 faces in this group is we all started thinking and acting locally, and then we extrapolated and we began to think globally, and then we started to act globally. And we started to free ourselves from thinking we are confined by previous silos. And so whether you engaging as a Buddhist or working in Sri Lanka or doing a tourist upskilling and liberation, planting in multiple sites and working as a doctor across these unlikely borders, is that not actually what the message is? Is to see ourselves as global citizens first and foremost, and not say, and there's a lovely saying in Africa, in Africa, you have many fathers, so you never have only one father. And then the corollary to that is that your child is my child. And so there's no African man, rural man or woman who would admonish another family, even if they didn't know them, who had punished their child or called their child to order because they were the parents at that time. And I think there's something in that humanity that we can distill and are distilling. And my last point is something I shared with Anitra, is that we should no longer project that the change lies ahead of us. This is the change. This is the change that is happening in the shell of the old. The change to the new is happening in the shell of the old, and it might be in pieces, but that's about as good as it is at the moment. So we should be positive about it and connect it relentlessly to get to the scale, not just the replication. Back to you, Anitra, and thank you for giving me some latitude in the questions.
That was very helpful, John. Thank you.
It would be
So-
very useful if Carlos were here, because one of the few times back, he said very clearly that we are not just trying to scale this stuff up, that we are trying to see what's replicable, and what's usable. And therefore, collectively, it may actually assemble itself into making a difference.
It is
So
the collective.
I think we're on to our next chapter, and I think one of the things we're going to have to do is think what we can present as the next order, because we all know that Limits to Growth is having its 50th anniversary, the book that Dana Meadows wrote. And I have a statement this morning from Dennis saying he wrote the reports. Dana wrote the entire Limits to Growth book, and he always has given credit to her. But the Germans said that if there was a first author as a woman, it wouldn't sell in Germany. So they all got together and decided, okay, they'd make Dennis the first author on the German translation. But at any rate, we need to think going on beyond Limits to Growth, which only talked about mostly one reference to 50 references to non-renewable and one reference to renewable resources, that we're talking about renewable resources that are totally within our grasp to make better and to regenerate, and that we are part of what's going on beyond that. And we need somehow to give this to the other COR members, but I think also to the associations, which, as John and Van and I know, are very, very talented people, at least from the US, and Ted knows from the Canadians. We have big, vibrant groups out there. So if nothing else, we share this with all the associations. That is the wisdom of what the Voyageurs have found. I think this will be an appropriate task for us in the next months. So Ted, did you want to say something in closing?
I was going to ask a question first. Have any of you heard the term transformational development?
Yeah.
It's emerging now in a number of different places. And it's somewhat compatible with what we've just been talking about, which is to don't just try and change stuff back, but try and make stuff better. And it's rather, it has components of it in terms of personal growth, and components of it in terms of restorative justice and restorative atmospheres and so on. Has a lot of components in it. It is ill-defined. There are a lot of people trying to make a living off of doing it. At the same time, I think it's probably worth thinking about as being compatible with what we really need in terms of trying to move society towards some concept that everybody understands is better than what it is now, or at least as good as what it is now.
All right, thank you all for coming, and we'll let you know when our next, which should be in about a month. Thank you all.
Send us ideas.
John,
We're gonna
Van.
steal good ideas anywhere we can.
Some, that's right, some volunteers.
Can I
Thank
catch
you.
for a minute, Anitra?
Marilyn, it was